My name is Taylor Greenfield. I am one of the two ergonomists here at the Windsor OHCOW clinic. Today we're going to be talking about ergonomics committees that work. Not just ergonomics committees, but how can you get them to work, how can you get them to be effective, what components of an ergonomics committee are important when you're setting one up. I was just asking before we started if anyone was on an ergonomics committee or has an ergonomics committee at their workplace. I'll ask again, so we do have some new people coming in. Welcome. Is anyone on an ergonomics committee right now? No? Is anyone thinking about setting up an ergonomics committee in their workplace? Okay, perfect. Well, that's good. That's a good start. If you don't mind me asking, what are some of the reasons why you came to this session today? We just have a couple of volunteers just blurt out. Why did you come here today? What interests you about this topic? Was it just the ergonomics that you were curious about learning a bit of ergonomics? For some of you? Curious about learning why you need an ergonomics committee or when it would be appropriate to have an ergonomics committee? Nods? Yes? Good? Okay. Learning about some tool use or some of the things you need to know about ergonomics when you're on a joint health and safety committee? Some others maybe? Yeah. Super. Okay. Just trying to get an idea because I'll spend a bit more time on some of those topics rather than some others. I want to get a flavor for who's in the audience and how to cater, the presentation to you. So if at any time you have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to just stop me and clarify something, and that will make sure that we cover everything that you came here for. Okay. So just to go through how we're going to run today, first of all, I'm going to talk about OHCOW clinics. How many of you have used our services before? Yes? Super. That's great to hear. Hopefully some of you will use our services more in the future, now that you know what the heck we do. I'll go through that, and then we'll talk about ergonomics committees. We'll start out with how to get started, how to identify and assess certain hazards in the workplace. We'll go through brainstorming some solutions, how you go about doing that effectively. Evaluating your ideas, and finally, judging the effectiveness of your committee overall. And how do you do that? How do you show your managers that you're producing the results that they ask? So, health and safety strategies. Most of you are in health and safety right now? Yes? Super. Very responsive crowd. I'm going to have you hooting and hollering like in my cycling class. Great idea. This gentleman has taken it upon himself to bring his work closer to him. He wants to have everything within arm's reach. That's super, but not exactly what we're looking for. So, this is an actual picture. I don't know if that's like this is not in Canada. No. This is not something that I've taken. No. This is just something from the internet. But he's applying ergonomic principles, trying to keep things within arm's reach, which is great, but not exactly doing it in the most effective way. So we'll have to go through.
What necessity is the mother of invention?
That's right. And obviously we can see from the workers themselves that there's a problem with his equipment or, his workstation. So Occupational Health Clinics for Ontario Workers, we call ourselves OHCOW because otherwise it's a bit of a mouthful and we don't like to blunder too much. We are a series of 5 clinics. I'll get into where we are. We also have several professionals, administration staff. I'll introduce Danielle Finley, who's one of our administration staff. And Lucy Bayshard is not, there's Lucy. Hi Lucy. Our second administration staff, and we have a temporary administration staff, Gina Davis, who's not here right now. And we also have an occupational physician. Some clinics have more than one. Ours is Dr. Deborah Hellier. She's not here at the time. I think she's coming in today, but you may be able to meet her a bit later. We have occupational health nurses as well. We have 2 at this clinic. Ivan Bauer is one, and Faye Lawn is the second. Neither are here today, or in this room, but they are here today, so you can always speak with them. We at the Windsor Clinic have 1 occupational hygienist, Barry Lamb. I was going to say Dr. Barry Lamb. He'd love that, wouldn't he? Barry Lamb is our hygienist here at the clinic. And we have 2 ergonomists. Brenda Malott, which a lot of you, I'm sure, know. She seems to know everyone in Windsor. And I'm newer. I'm Taylor Greenfield, one of the second ergonomists. We also have a co-op student in ergonomics, Jennifer Stroud, and a nursing student, Chris. I'm not sure of your last name. Ward, thanks. So Chris is our nursing student. Oh, and our second nursing student. I'm sorry. I forget.
Joanne McLaughlin.
Joanne McLaughlin. Thank you, Joanne. So we do have 2 nursing students right now. So in Ontario, as I mentioned, we have 5 clinics: Toronto, Sudbury, Sarnia, Hamilton, and Windsor, of course. We have a website, which is really comprehensive, brand new, fantastic resource for getting resources, fact sheets, any sort of what's going on in the area. We have part of the website dedicated to the Windsor area as well, so you can find out the occupational health and safety things that we're incorporated with here. So, as you know, we have a seminar series happening the first Wednesday of every month. We've already covered topics such as molds, stress, ergonomics and driving. We've done Ergonomics Committee today, and our next one will be on office indoor air quality, presented by our hygienist, Barry Lambs. So, first Wednesday of every month at 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. And that is included in your packages here too. If it's not the best quality, please let me know. I can get you a bigger one. That was the only copy that I thought I had. I actually have a second one. And we can give you more copies for distribution. So, why is it important to form ergonomics committees? Why is ergonomics becoming such a hot topic? What's going on in the workplace these days? Well, over 50% of WSIB cases that were registered last year were musculoskeletal in nature. I'll say musculoskeletal a lot. It's basically injuries to the soft tissues. 1/3 of those were supposedly from ergonomic hazards. So basically we've got ergonomic things in the workplace, risks that are associated with causing these injuries. Awful lot of injuries, and if we address those hazards, we can greatly reduce some of the claims that are being put into the compensation board. Ergonomics. I have to stress this right off the bat. Ergonomics works best when people are not injured. So, I'll say it one more time. Ergonomics works best when people are uninjured. All of ergonomics research, or most of ergonomics research, is done on a healthy population. Once a person becomes injured, the biomechanics of your tissues and your whole body changes, and you compensate in ways that are not normal or like the average population. So we're looking at, in ergonomics, prevention of injury. And OHCOW Clinic, our mandate is on prevention of occupational illness and injury. Ergonomics deals with both the office setting and the risks associated with office, and also manufacturing. So it's basically taking the ergonomic risks, minimizing or reducing them so that we eliminate or reduce the injuries in the workplace, musculoskeletal injuries. I think that's all I want to say about that. So, as far as legislation is concerned, ergonomics is a little different than something like hygiene, where you have actual regulations on the chemical exposures that you are exposed to at work. Unfortunately, ergonomics in Ontario is not regulated and cannot be enforced by an association such as ourselves. BC and Saskatchewan have gone forward and have language in their provincial regulations that speak to ergonomics, and it's the beginning of enforcing ergonomic law, but Ontario has yet to get there. We do have in the Occupational Health and Safety Act a duty to basically put the workers in a safe environment. So that's as far as we've gotten so far in Ontario with addressing ergonomic concerns. The Canadian Labour Code, recently the federal government has taken it upon themselves to include ergonomic language in their regulations. So some federal employees will be covered in the next few years. They're just in the process of deciding which guidelines or which standards they'll use to decide on ergonomic regulations. Finally, Ministry of Labour. We now have guidelines that we at OHCOW try to use when we're doing assessments, and always use, I should say, when doing assessments, but they are just guidelines and they're not standards. So it's important, if you're forming an ergonomic committee, to be aware of what legislation exists, what is enforceable, and mostly what is unenforceable at this time. And it's always important that we push for greater legislation so that we can enforce these ergonomic concerns. So, getting started, when is it important to ask for an ergonomics committee? Well, it can come from a number of people. Oh, pardon me, sorry, I'm going page up, page down. It can be a decision that the Joint Health and Safety Committee proposes because they realize that they have so much to deal with that they're not able to get around to addressing their ergonomic concerns. They can say, you know, we've constantly been dealing with other things, we keep putting ergonomic concerns on the back burner, people are still getting injured, we need a separate committee to address these issues. It can also come from workers themselves. Workers can realize, hey, wait a second, this doesn't feel right, this is too much of a reach, this is too high, so they can propose to their Joint Health and Safety Committee, you know, I think we should look at having an ergonomic committee to address these concerns of our team or of our plant. Can also come from an engineering group. If engineers are constantly having to redesign their processes to incorporate ergonomic concerns, then why don't they just start at the design process? So an engineering group can come to the realization that, hey, if we just had this incorporated into our design before we put it on the floor, that would make things a lot easier. Could come from the engineers. It could become part of your corporate policy, or it could already be part of your corporate policy and you're just not aware of it. So it's important when you're proposing these things to management to look into the corporate policy and see if it's already included in your language. Could also become part of your collective agreement. The CAW has done a great job, GM, Ford, Chrysler done a great job of including ergonomic language and ergonomic committee suggestions in their collective agreement, and you can always get examples of that language by going on their site or by talking to one of their ergonomics reps. Getting started. Who should be on the committee? It's very important that you don't have a committee that is just of ergonomists. You need to have ergonomics, you need to have engineering, and you need to have corporate. Those are three really main stakeholders. This was a quote taken from the IEA conference in 2003. IEA is International Ergonomics Association. But what's most important is that you have workers. You need to start with the workers because they're the ones that do the work and they're the ones that know why they're taking the shortcuts or what causes them the most strains, etc., etc. So you've got committee members, workers, managers, always very important, computer technician, the man who's going to be, or woman who's going to be doing the changes, the maintenance people. It's always important that you have them on board because a lot of ergonomic problems are due to poor maintenance as well, making things more forceful or with more vibration, etc., etc. And then Joint Health and Safety Committee members is always important to have them on board as well. It's imperative that when you're making your recommendations that they go through the Joint Health and Safety Committee so that the Occupational Health and Safety Act applies to those recommendations as well. So that's why it's important to have a Joint Health and Safety Committee member on your ergonomics committee. I think that's all I want to say about that. A lot of the structure of this is very similar to the Joint Health and Safety Committee, so it may strike a chord with most of you as being familiar, but it is important that you have a person from each stakeholding group on your committee, just as it is for a Joint Health and Safety Committee. Oh, we've seen that already. Oh, I'm going page up again, pardon me. This is a new device. Not very ergonomically friendly. No. Okay. So, it'll be important, pardon me, I'll just get my notes, make sure I'm not missing anything. It'll be important when you are getting started on your committee that you have a good basis to start from. It's great that you're starting with this class. It'll give you an idea of some of the ergonomic concerns in the workplace, and it'll give you an idea of what to expect as part of an ergonomics committee, but you may have additional training needs. You may want a cost-benefit analysis. So how do you explain to your managers that this ergonomic suggestion is going to save you money in the long run? How do you explain to your managers that they're carrying 150% of their workforce because there's so many injured workers, whereas they could be carrying just 100%? How do you explain that? You may want training on that. Other sorts of training, you may want to look into how to do proper assessments, what assessments are necessary versus maybe not necessary, making recommendations, how to do that effectively, who to include in making recommendations, and how to set goals properly so that you can use them later for judging your effectiveness. Once you go through some of those things, you get into more advanced topics where committee members may want to learn about advanced concepts in ergonomics, depending on how long your committee has been around. Maybe looking at organizational behavior and how the structure of the organization is increasing injuries or illness in the workplace. Also incorporating ergonomics into design, like I was speaking about with having the engineers on board. Rather than retrofitting all your equipment, why not include it in the design process straight away? It's actually 10 times more expensive to retrofit workplaces than it is to incorporate ergonomics design in the first place. So it's another cost-benefit thing that you need to know. And identification of root causes. I'm sure a lot of you from audits are aware of root cause analysis, and it's always important that you get to the source of the problem and not just put a Band-Aid over top. So these are some of the courses that you can get. If you're looking for more information, you can always contact myself or Brenda on certain where to get training. We were saying you could look at the Association of Canadian Ergonomists. Brenda is actually our Ontario president, so she's a fantastic resource for any sort of ergonomic training or course concerns. Other associations, IEPA, Workers' Health and Safety Center, or sector-specific safe work associations. And then you've got the universities and colleges as well in the area. Okay, so we've gotten started. We know who's going to be on our committee. We know what kind of training we need. We've kind of got an idea of what's important to know before we get started out. Now we need to decide which approach will we use. And I'll talk about approaches in a moment when we get a little further down the line, but ergonomics can be done in a retroactive way where you're looking at injuries that have already happened and trying to retrofit equipment, or it can be done in a proactive way where you're looking at things ahead of time and predicting the injuries that could occur. So you need to decide which way you're going to go, and I'll explain how you decide. You'll need to look at how do you prioritize interventions. Line 1 has 32 upper limb injuries. Line 2 has 32 lower body injuries. Line 3 has 32 back injuries. How do you prioritize those? We'll talk about that. Will you need professionals? Sometimes you want to get started, you've got a bit of training, but you're dealing with a really complicated issue. So you may need to call in some professionals like Brenda or myself to do an assessment for you, or to help guide you or point you in the right direction for where to go for resource materials and whatnot. Luckily, Brenda and I are completely free, so you can always call us and not have to justify anything in a way. But you may want to also go to a consultant sometimes if you're getting physical demands analysis done. We can't do those. So you may need to incorporate some professionals. And of course, what are your budget limitations? That's something that you'll need to talk to your managers and team leader or business unit manager about. If you're using professionals, could increase your budget. What types of things? You want to know this straight off the bat so that you're not suggesting that they get an entirely new line when they only have budget for, a footstool or something along those lines. You need to work within the constraints of your budget, but still remain effective. So sometimes budget needs to be discussed with management ahead of time, every time. We've probably all seen this as part of the health and safety model. It's talking about the tip of the iceberg are those major terrible tragedies that we hear about where someone has died at a workplace. We've got fatalities at the tip of the iceberg. You've got the reported lost time injuries that are just below that. More people, it's expensive to carry them as part of your workforce. We've got the medically treatable, more people again underneath that. Medically treatable injuries, they're still at work, maybe on modified duties. But what's most important and what often gets missed are all of the incidents at the bottom, and that's where ergonomics seeks to, they're not injured yet, we're going to prevent the injury from occurring. We want to address that entire pocket of your work workplace. Although the frequency is getting lower and the probability is getting lower when you get to the top of the iceberg, it's very expensive to have those incidents and accidents happen. It's expensive to have people that are in pain on modified duties. As I mentioned, you could end up carrying 150% of your workforce. So you're paying a lot of money for something that could be prevented, the ergonomic risks that could be prevented. That's one way to explain it to management if they want to make dollars and cents of it. So a lot of people get started with ergonomic committees by looking simply at the accidents and injuries that have happened in the workplace. Have most of you done this as part of the Joint Health and Safety Committee? Yeah. So you take a look, you get your sheets, and you say, okay, there have been 65 arm injuries and 24 eye injuries and whatnot. And that's a great place to start, especially if you're just starting out. But what's important to know about those lagging indicators, we call them, is that they're lagging. The compensation claim, they've already happened. The risk was already there. There's been 6 months or 1 year where things have passed. Maybe the line has changed. So you think that line 1 has a whole bunch of claims and you need to address it. You probably do. But be aware that maybe line 1 has changed since all of those claims went in, and so you go in to make an intervention and things have really changed, and now you're not getting it. So it's important to realize that there's usually a gap between when an injury is reported and when you go in there, and it's something to be aware of anyhow. Going further down, we've got the first aid and the absenteeism log. So that's before compensation claims have been filed, possibly. It's just a first aid report. Maybe someone's off for a day or two. You can look at those, and they're a bit less lagging. So a bit of a truer indicator as to what's going on right now. A great way to find out what's going on at this time is by doing discomfort surveys, and I'll show you a bit later on a sample of a body mapping technique. Discomfort surveys can be done quickly, easily. They can be back in 1 day or a week. You can find out exactly what body parts are hurting on people in what area. It doesn't have to be specific to the person, but if 3 people are welders and all of the welders have shoulder injuries, well, maybe you should go down to the automatic welder or the station that they're at and address those issues there. Discomfort surveys are very easy and they can be very effective. Another way to notice if you're having injuries in the workplace, but maybe they haven't been registered, is by looking at the number of people wearing braces or supports. We're always saying how you go into Zayres and you see these cashiers with their wrist braces. They've hopefully reported their injuries and they've filed a compensation claim, but what if they haven't and you don't realize that there's even a problem there? But 6 of them all have wrist braces on. So it's interesting to see how many people are wearing braces in the workplace. Maybe it was an unwork-related issue, but maybe it was a work-related issue as well. So that's another way of knowing or observing injuries in the workplace. Finally, if you're getting really proactive, you can look at things such as scrap rates, quality issues, or high turnover rate of jobs. High turnover rate, also something that you want to investigate. If there's one job where you can't even get a person to stay there for 2 weeks, maybe there's something wrong with that job. Usually it's excessively strenuous on the individual, and that's why they're just going into that job to move up the ladder. And they really, there's something wrong with that job. That needs to be assessed. So you can look at the amount of turnover as well as an indicator of ergonomic need. So as I was mentioning before, there are 2 approaches to ergonomics. One is a reactive approach, which is coming up with solutions after the problem has already been shown. So usually it's injuries. So you're coming up with a solution to retrofit some equipment because injuries have been occurring like crazy in this area. The second approach that you can use in ergonomics, and something that we always want to work towards, is getting to those solutions before the injuries occur, okay? And that can be done by identifying the ergonomic risks. We know that posture, if it's static or if it's awkward or excessive, can be a risk factor, an ergonomic risk factor. We know that excessive vibration or hand tools or whole body vibration is a risk factor for ergonomics. So we seek to minimize these risk factors, and that's more of a proactive approach. Before people even get injured, we're in there and we're eliminating or reducing these risks. So it's important that you know both. Identifying. So when you go in to assess a workplace, you can either take a passive approach, an active approach, or a combined approach to the workplace. And that'll depend on what kind of injuries you have in that workplace at that time. For example, if you have many injuries in one area, so you know that the offices on the 5th floor have many injuries of the wrist, you may need passive investigation, which means just using the injury data straight off the bat, going in, doing the individual assessments, and hopefully minimizing the risk in that area for the injured people and everyone else. If there are no injuries apparent, we were talking about scrap rates and all of that, you may have to do what they call an active investigation. You investigate the risk factors of this area, like I was mentioning before. It doesn't seem like there are any injuries there, but your ergonomics committee is still going to go in and investigate the risks because people may not be injured yet, but they may be well on their way to getting injured. And you do that by using discomfort surveys like I was speaking about before. You may do both approaches if you have a few injuries. So you'll start by addressing the injuries that have occurred in that area, removing the risks, and then seeking a more active approach with discomfort surveys and body mapping and whatnot, and further reducing the risk of ergonomic injuries. All right, setting goals. The most important thing I think that maybe ergonomic committees overlook is the importance of setting goals and reflecting those goals or assessing those goals when you're done. It's always important to management that you justify, the extra costs and all of the manpower that they're investing in this committee. So it's important for you to set specific goals with percentages and time limits. Reduce musculoskeletal disorders, so injuries, by 20% in the next 2 years. It's got to be specific, it's got to be measurable, and it's got to be appropriate or attainable. So I've just got a couple of examples here. Operating objectives is putting a person in charge of the tasks and setting a deadline for them as well. That's very important because that's something that can be measurable and can be measured when you're going to judge your effectiveness at the end. So Taylor is to review the claims and determine rates of severity for line 3 by June 2004. It's important as well for the Ergonomics Committee to realize or to see the grand scope of ergonomics. Ergonomics isn't just the physical things. It's not just the posture. It's not just the repetition. It deals with both the workstation design, which is the physical things, but also the work environment. It deals with the equipment and tools, of course, but also the work organization. So from that, I mean work environment, it could be very cold. You could have an extremely strict boss and management structure, so people feel like they have to work as fast as they can. So it's not just that, you can go and do your measurements and sure, the design is perfect. The workstation looks great. But the problem may be in the work environment that the people are driven to work as fast as they can. They're skipping their lunch breaks so that they can get the production done because the number is so large that they can't possibly get it done in the 7 hours that they're supposed to be at work, etc., etc. Work organization. It could be something like, yeah, you have job rotation, which is great, but each of the jobs require you to use your hands. So the organization of those tasks isn't giving the person a rest, so they're still suffering from injury because they're constantly using their hands with every job that they rotate through. Do you see what I mean? So even though you've set up the physical things perfectly or in an ergonomic way, the way that the workplace is organized and the way that the work environment presents itself may lead to injuries as well. So it's important to consider all of those things as well, and that comes with experience and training and whatnot, or consulting professionals. So you may need some tools. We'll get a little bit easier now. As part of your ergonomics committee, Simple things, tape measure, portable scale, those things will be used in your assessment. So we'll talk about the assessment tools on the next slide, but you may need certain things. Other things, maybe as you graduate into more and more, into a larger, as you take on bigger projects, you may need things such as a torque wrench, you may need a force gauge, or you may end up consulting professionals, like we have a force gauge here. So you can use those tools, but those things are often required as well. Ergonomic guidelines. Does this ring a bell with anyone? Has anyone seen these ergonomic guidelines before? Sort of, yeah. So a lot of times, certain guidelines are good for certain tasks, and certain guidelines are better for other tasks. But it's important that the Ergonomics Committee, A, knows that there are guidelines that you can follow for setting up certain, or for making changes, and that not all guidelines are good for all things. Certain guidelines are better for other things. So you may want to consult professionals, you may want to take courses in how to do the tools, but it's important, again, for justifying why the changes are made, that you have a measurable starting point and end point. Okay. I was speaking previously about poor organization in the workplace. And research has shown that things such as job stress, job dissatisfaction, all of these can not only increase the muscle tension that someone's using, but maybe require them to use more force because they're so angry. So job dissatisfaction, high work-rest ratios, as I mentioned before. If you're doing a lot of work and not a lot of rest, that could increase your risk for injury as well. Monotonous and repetitive work. That's another thing that has increased the risk of musculoskeletal injuries. If your job is boring, believe it or not, research has shown that you're more risk of getting an injury. Repetitiveness has been justified over and over again, but the monotonous one is quite interesting. If an individual feels like they have low job control, or they're uncertain about their job, we have a lot of temporary workers right now. They don't know where they're going to be, maybe in 6 months, they're on contracts. That, believe it or not, can also increase your risk of developing a musculoskeletal injury. Limited supervisor support. If you're just thrown on the shop floor, you're not given any training, you don't know who you're reporting to or where to go if there's a problem, that again can lead to a bit of stress. It can increase your risk for musculoskeletal injury, and needs to be addressed by the Ergonomics Committee. As I mentioned, stress at work can increase your risk of physical injury. So it's an important thing to consider as part of the committee. Headaches, coronary heart disease, ulcers, diabetes, blood pressure can decrease your immune system. Pain in your stomach, chest, muscle tension, weight gain, which has other effects, carpal tunnel, so on and so forth. All of these things are a response to stressors in the workplace. Faye already did a stress presentation, so if you didn't get that, then you can get the notes from that and learn a bit more about it. Okay, moving along, ergonomic interventions. So we were talking a bit about this. I'll go through this quickly. There are 2 types of interventions. It's just important to know this happens with, actually quite a few professions. Hygiene for sure. Engineering changes where you physically go in and you change the workstation itself. Or administrative changes where you can go in and talk about things like job rotation. There are 2 types of changes that you can do. So I've spoken with someone recently whose office is so small that she says, I can't possibly get a bigger desk in here. I can't possibly do this and that. Well, maybe there are some other administrative changes that can reduce her risk of injury that she can incorporate. So when management or someone says to you, we can't buy this equipment, there are other things that you can do as well. Unfortunately, administrative changes are usually not as effective, and they rely on the worker or the people using the workstation to continue doing them and to understand why they're doing them and to continue that. Engineering changes, the worker has to work in that space. If you change the space, they still have to work in that space. So I'd always recommend putting in an engineering change over administrative change. However, you have the ability to make an administrative change if that's all you can do. 2 types of changes. Brainstorming recommendations. This goes for brainstorming anything. If you have kids that you want to just try and figure out how to punish them and they want to brainstorm an idea with you, this is how you do it. Brainstorming in general, you always want to put down all ideas. So any sort of idea that comes out of a meeting, no matter how silly you think it is or how absurd you think it is, you need to record it, because you never know, you may get through all of your changes and then all of a sudden that last suggestion doesn't seem so absurd and you can actually go through with it. So it's important to record these things as you do with the Joint Health and Safety Committee. Recording things, this is a little bit full on, but you know, the tool is heavy. Short term, we could balance the tool. Excuse me. Long term, we could investigate purchasing lighter tools. Tasks are repetitive. Short-term change or short-term suggestion, job rotation. Long-term change, maybe automating the task. So you need to come up with both short-term and long-term recommendations. Identify the risk factor first, and then just throw out a whole bunch of ideas in brainstorming solutions for an area. Now, when it comes to evaluating or coming up with your solutions itself, it's important to build and test a prototype. So for example, we went to a seminar at our national conference this year, and someone was actually not making a change to a line, but making a change to an office station. I believe it was in a bank.
It was a federal workplace. It was a workstation, but it wasn't a bank.
Okay, so it wasn't
Similar type of workstation.
Yeah, library or something maybe. So it's important, before you invest a whole bunch of money into changing a line or into changing your office setup, why don't you build a prototype? It sounds kind of random, but it's an idea for the Ergonomics Committee to save some costs. Rather than ordering the equipment and then deciding that that setup doesn't work at all, you know, build a prototype. Secondly, you can work towards including ergonomics in design. I keep coming back to that because it's so important. People will often call us after they've changed their entire office and they've ordered all this equipment, which by the way wasn't on loan. They ordered it and they got it. They can't take it back. And then they call us in and say, okay, we've got this new equipment, what can you do for us? Well, first of all, that chair is too small for you and that chair is too big for you. And so incorporate ergonomics before you even start. Get us on the design side or on the brainstorming side, because I'm telling you, we can save 10 times the cost if we do it before you actually order the equipment. So measuring your effectiveness. This is, as I was mentioning, part of a body mapping or a symptom survey that you can include to workers. It can be completely anonymous. It's important that you know what area they're coming from, so you need to know that they're all on line 1, or they're all on the welding station, or they're all on the 3rd floor in the HR department. And then you can have them do these types of body mapping things, and that can be a better snapshot of what's going on right now, as opposed to looking at just the claims. Measuring your effectiveness, it's important that you've already set your goals, they're measurable. You've already set your objectives, you know who's responsible and when their project is due, and then stick to those. So make them realistic, stick to them, refer back to them, and that's how you can justify to your manager, look, we're making these changes, we've had a 20% decrease in symptoms in this area, we've changed all of the workstations so that they're ergonomically sound in the last 6 months, so on and so forth. Pre and post measures. Not only can you give these symptom surveys at the beginning to find out what's going on in an area, but why not give them at the end so that you can find out what your changes have done. You can also look at the decreased scrap, discomfort, so on. Record your goals. Take a binder and record all of your goals so that you can say to management, look, here are all the things that we've accomplished, here's the reason why we're being effective, so on and so forth. And again, you always want to try and move towards a proactive approach. So just because you've got 0 injuries in your workplace doesn't mean to say that you have 0 ergonomic risks in the workplace either. You're constantly working towards making things better, you're assessing the hazards, you're going and making changes when necessary. One quick thing I just wanted to say, and we've kind of covered this, but I'll reiterate it again. Sometimes what can happen, you get to a change, you make a change, so say you made a change here, and then all of a sudden your discomfort rating goes through the roof. Does anybody understand why that would happen? Any suggestions?
You change what they were doing, so naturally the discomfort is going to go up because you're using different muscles possibly.
Okay, yeah. So you're supposed to make it safer, you're supposed to make it easier, so why are they saying there's more pain? If you've gone in and made all these ergonomic recommendations, yeah.
Learning curve, it takes some time to adjust to new movements, and you're using muscles that you never used before. That would contribute it. Also, an awareness.
Yeah,
When you
exactly.
start talking ergonomics, people say, you know, I've got that. And they start reporting.
Perfect, yeah. Very true. A lot of times it's just awareness. Did you have anything to add, Kelly? That was what you were going to say? You guys are on the same page. That's beautiful. But it's true. You go in there and you do a symptom survey in January. You get a baseline. You go in March, you make all these changes, and everything that both of you have said is true. Now all of a sudden people are like, oh, remember that girl was in and she asked me about my neck? Oh, my neck is sore. The time when they thought, oh, my neck's not really sore. Now all of a sudden their neck's sore. They've had changes. There's a learning curve. They're using new muscles. It takes them a while to get used to the new equipment. They're not proficient at it just yet. They may be exerting more energy, all of these things. What's really important is the after effect. So you can see that in January you were at 20% injuries, or a scale of 20. And by December of the following year, you're down below 10. So you need to look at it long term, and don't just pull out the intervention because you see a bit of a peak after a couple of weeks in March. That's important to notice. Keep track. Again, just judging your objectives and your goals, putting a person in charge, setting a target date, setting the priority, is the solution possible, so on. Meet regularly, be specific, investigate, evaluate often, keep record of your achievements. Yeah?
I think you also have to communicate your achievements to the people that are working for you to make sure that they on the floor know exactly what you're doing at all times and keep them up to date on that, so these problems are not festering constantly.
Yeah.
You're showing that you're doing something to try
And it's important that they know that you're doing it for the betterment of them, because then they'll be more supportive of your changes, they'll be more voluntary with what they add to it, and in the long run that will help you make the decisions as well. So keeping them informed. You know, your Joint Health and Safety Committee has a board, why not have an Ergonomics Committee board? Let them know what's coming up, what you're investigating, what lines you're working on, what changes you're doing, and then how effective you've been in reducing the symptoms in the area, or injuries even. Continue to seek worker input. Perfect. Finally, we're just about 5 minutes away. Summary, get support. Most important that you get support. We've talked about this already, but it's most important that you get support from all stakeholders. To management, you may have to justify it with money, with dollars and cents. To the workers, you may have to justify it with decrease in pain, symptoms. So you need to change your strategy of how you're going to get support, but it's important that everyone on the committee has buy-in, or you're not going to be as effective. If you already have a committee, maybe you need to revisit that. Clearly define your goals, again, so that you have something to measure when you go back and you accumulate these goals as a justification of continuing the ergonomic committee. Involve the workers is so important. The workers are the ones oftentimes that have the ideas. It just takes you to facilitate those ideas. I mean, they need to have a science or some sort of basis that you can justify them, but get their ideas. Record all ideas, even if they seem outrageous. Build your confidence with your committee by starting with smaller projects. Start with the small projects so that you can justify to workers, to management, okay, look, it's working, we're doing something, we're making changes, it's benefiting everyone. And then build to the bigger things. Don't jump in there and try and change the entire line too straight off the bat because you're not experienced yet, you don't exactly know what tools to use, what professionals to use. So start small and work towards something bigger. Understand your injury statistics. I hope that I've given you a better look at why some injuries occur, why you can't always just use claims, and why you may need to include symptom surveys as well. understand the other significant risk factors, so things like the structure of the environment, the supervisors, the organization, how that can increase stress. Maybe it's cold, they're working outside, they're working with vibrating tools, they're working with gloves, so on and so forth. And work towards approving all new equipment or processes, signing off on all sort of engineering changes that happen. So you start small, you work up. Once you get a really efficient committee, then you start working in the proactive sense and approving all the new equipment and processes that come into your workplace. Thank you.